Salish, Duwamish, and affiliated Coast Salish Nations tribes, and recognize that everything that we do should be with an eye to the level of stewardship that the first peoples of this nation brought to this land. And in hopes that we can carry on in that tradition of stewardship, caring for the land and the resources that we now have the opportunity to benefit from, so that our future generations can also benefit from these same resources. I think since we don't have any members of the public, unless someone wants to carry on with introductions, I will just move into the core of the meeting. Have you all received the agenda?
No.
Hopefully it's in the email. Corey, could you put it up on the screen, please?
Okay.
I will walk through it verbally, just so everyone can kind of follow along while we get it up on the screen. Effectively, the agenda is call to order, welcome and introductions, and then adopt the agenda. And right now, the agenda includes review and approve meeting minutes, but I do not know if we have.
No, I did not get.
So we will dispense with that. There will be public comments. However, it appears that there are no members of the public. So we'll move into the business of the meeting, which includes reviewing 2024 summer events that we could use for outreach and publicity. A quick review of graphic novel status, implementation of the Climate Action Plan, a discussion of Initiative 2117, collaboration with K4C, and any other topics that members of the committee choose to bring forward. So with that agenda, understanding that we will not be addressing either item 4 or item 5, I ask for a motion to approve the agenda. Linda, are you raising your hand to approve the agenda?
Yes, I was turning off my mute and yes.
Thank you, Ma'am.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Mimi. I ask that everyone unmute. This is a small enough meeting, and our team has been remarkably cordial and respectful of each other. So please unmute, and we'll just move forward as assiduously as possible. Okay, summer events that I've been aware of. We have several that are coming up. We have Family Day. We have potential for an electric car show. And I wanted to ask if there are any other public events this summer that folks would like to consider having us connect with, support, potentially ask for a booth.
I did hear what they're doing picnic in the park again this year, so
Yep.
maybe that's always a good one that we can. I'm not sure what we would do or what, maybe we
Just
could.
have a table, maybe.
Our booth at the farmers market was, I thought, quite successful. A number of us sat in. We had a number of people stop by and either take a screenshot of the QR code so that they could get to the Climate Action Plan, or take one of our little QR code flyers with them. And we had a lot of engagement with kids. Kids had a great time coloring in their salmon and taking their salmon home. And we collected a number of suggestion names for our salmon mascot, which we should continue to do at outreach events. At a minimum, I would hope that we could look at having a pop-up at Picnic in the Park, or I'm sorry, Family Day. Corey, do you know if that's possible?
Yeah, you guys know the way.
So, would we have, what is the exact date and time of Family Day?
September 7th, 2 to 6 p.m.
So do we have any volunteers who are willing to commit to attending for at least a part of the 2 to 6 p.m. time frame on September 7th?
Hold on.
What is Family Day?
Yeah, what is it?
Is that the same thing as picnic in the park?
Yeah.
No.
Family Day.
No.
It's just like the normal farmer's market, but we have a booth and then city public works big rigs for kids to go in it. It'll be bubbles.
Would that-
They're
10 to
Video.
2 then, right? Wouldn't that be, I think I have that on my calendar. That would be, wouldn't it be at the farmer's market, right? So it'd be 10 to 2?
It's the 7th, but it's at the farmer's market.
Family Day is the 25th.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said 7th.
Picnic in the park is the 7th.
Thank you.
That's what I was confused at.
So let's start with Family Day at farmer's market, 2 to 6.
What day is that? I'm sorry. What day did we say that was?
Picnic in the park.
No, let's focus on Family Day right now. At the farmer's market, so that's the 25th from 2 to 6 p.m. if I have that correctly.
No, it'd be 10 to 2.
Wait.
It's at the farmer's market.
What day?
So it's Sunday, August 25th.
Oh, August 20th. Okay, I'll be out of town that day.
Actually, I will be out of town as well.
Yeah. We're not going together, however.
They're not Brian.
I'm sorry, what?
I'm just taking notes as to who cannot possibly assist.
Yeah, I'm out of town that day.
Me too.
I should be able to.
Mm-hmm. I can too. So we're thinking of, so it won't be like an official table. It'll just be like a pop-up.
Well, it will be a pop-up with a table. We'll have handouts. We'll have the little salmon for the fish, for the kids. Basically, it'll be the same as our farmer's market booth this last time around.
Okay.
So I've got Matt, Tamara, me, and that's enough to staff it. We could certainly say a yes on that. Okay. And let's take picnic in the park next, which is, and please correct me if I have this wrong, so September 7th from 2 to 6.
Right.
And that would be the same approach of having a pop-up with a folding table, some chairs, handouts, and basically just make ourselves available as an activity for the kids and a chance to talk to the parents as they come through.
I'm happy.
Oh, fantastic. Sarah coordinated that last time, and she gave me the skills of how to get more salmon if we need them. They just
And can I get back to you on that? I may be able to make it, but I have to check a couple things.
that's just fine. We won't, we'll clear up details as we get closer to the event because
Okay.
we always want to leave room for people having the ever recurring unexpected event. And at the same time, I think we can possibly be at these outdoor events in the summer where there are lots of people from our city. That's the best possible outreach we can do right now. Just make ourselves available. So if we're looking at September 7th, which is the picnic in the park date, is there anyone who is absolutely certain they can or absolutely certain they cannot attend that? Either certainty is welcome.
Absoluteness is hard.
The little far out.
Absolutely going to be on vacation. For instance, Sarah knew she was absolutely going to not be here tonight. If you have that kind of certainty in your life, share it, that'd be great.
I should be able to do it for a little while Garrett will be out of town, so I'll be single parenting, so likely not for that long, but I'm sure I could stop by for a little bit.
And bring the kids. Spend
Exactly.
I should be able to help. I should be able to, but not with absolute certainty.
Understood.
And I will be, I'm happy to do a shift. I'm gonna be splitting my time once again between the Stewardship Foundation and the Climate Action Committee, so.
That's right, put the booths next to each
Put
other.
them right next to each other and we've got everything made, that's right.
That'll help, that'll help.
The fish can do double duty. Those cutout fish can go for both.
Well, as one booth slows down, the other speeds up. It's good to, it's just good to have the connections through the city, through the community, so. Okay, that is enough volunteers to say absolutely yes, we will participate in picnic in the park. Okay. So, the other event we discussed, and I had a side conversation with Brian that I just want to bring to the entire group. We're discussing, we've had an ongoing discussion of having some kind of an electric car show. And we were trying to find an event that we could overlap with so that people would be attending that event. And then there would also be an electric car show. And correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but our thought was this year has gotten complicated enough that it's hard to figure out how to do it this year with proper promotion, with getting the cars there and doing it during a time of year where we can ensure good weather. So we weren't comfortable committing to having it in connection with picnic in the park, for example. And the fallback to this is to try to have it next spring in connection with our Earth Day celebrations, which are, we've started to make that into a really useful annual event that people can look forward to. And that could be a keystone feature of our upcoming Earth Day celebrations in April of next year. So given that we don't have really the availability to put it on successfully this fall, and moving it out to April gives us time to plan and pull together a really solid event. Is there any objection to simply assuming that we will move any electric car show off of the fall agenda and move it towards next spring?
No,
That it seemed
Yeah, it
very,
sounds reasonable.
yeah. We don't want to do it in December. It's raining. People are tied up with many other projects. So our thought was if we couldn't get it in before October, we should probably delay until the good weather comes in spring again.
yeah,
Okay, so we're gonna put that on the back burner. That will move to next spring. Are there any other events that anyone would like to look at for this, really between now and the winter holidays, through the rest of 2024?
Do we know if like any of our neighboring cities are having any events that might want to partner with?
The only event I can think of, Tamara, is there's the Stream Fest that Kenmore, Bothell, and Lake Forest Park kind of all jointly put on, and that takes place at Log Boom Park on the 14th of September.
oh,
I'm going to be there with the Stewardship Foundation, but I don't see why the Climate Action Committee couldn't be there. That'd be actually kind of a nice way to, maybe we could work together with Kenmore and those guys and their Climate Action Committee and see if we can have a joint table or something.
What's the name of that
Yeah,
again?
good idea. Thank you.
Yeah.
September 14th is Stream Fest.
The Saturday.
That's a Saturday.
So it's basically a week after our picnic in the park outing. That would be great. We'd have everything ready to go.
There will be a garage sale that weekend in Lake Forest Park.
You know, we're bound to have some, conflicts. I think the benefit of connecting with the Stream Fest would be to try to build a relationship with our colleagues in Bothell and Kenmore.
Mhm.
Kenmore has a climate action plan, Bothell does not yet. And if we're just literally in the same physical space and chatting, it's more likely that provide support for having a broader implementation of climate action across the north end of Lake Washington.
Mhm.
Shoreline's already got their plan up and running. Shoreline has a big event coming up in the near future.
Hmm.
Shoreline Fest or something like this.
Don't know.
I'm probably thinking it's the Celebrate Shoreline Festival. It's coming up on this August 17th. But I think that's very shoreline focused. Celebrate Shoreline. So I think we should let them have, you know, I don't want to tag in on an event that is focused on their community. But if anyone is interested, they should have some sort of booth where they're sharing information about their climate action plan, and simply attending, connecting with people at Shoreline who are doing this work might be interesting. So just going to mention it not as a let's go usurp their event, but as a feel free to swing by, see what they're doing. It's going to be in Cromwell Park on August 19th from noon to 9 p.m. So, nope, that's the wrong year. Sorry. It is the August 17th at noon at Cromwell Park. So Saturday, August 17th. So as a community building exercise, if anyone wanted to attend that and touch base and check in with the climate activists, Shoreline, that would be a time and place where we may be able to connect with them outdoors in a social environment.
Well, Anne, I'll go ahead and I'll try and reach out to the city of Kenmore and Bothell and their climate committee or their city councils and just see if they want to do a joint table or something.
That would be fantastic. If you could find out if we'd be permitted to support the event and join in with the Stream Fest.
Yeah, tomorrow.
Just, that would be wonderful. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, well, I think it's being organized. I could be wrong, but I think it's being organized by Eric Admin from the Snow King Watershed Council, and so he's already invited the Stewardship Foundation. I can ask him if it'd be appropriate to have this table together. So
I've met Eric in a number of situations, so I expect he'd be happy to have us there.
yeah.
Oh,
I'm sorry?
so I'll be out of town.
That's not a problem, as long as we can pick up the banner. It's the main. And Brian, if you could just follow up directly with me, because we need to bring things like a pop-up or table, anything of that sort, we can arrange that either with Corey or with our own resources.
Yeah,
but
sounds good.
Banner and such. That'd be great. Anything else on summer events? And summer stretches into the fall.
Is that official?
Like it or not.
I'll be doing a pause in the park, probably October 19th, but details aren't set yet. Keep that in mind.
Pause the park.
What in the, I didn't hear her.
Pause in the park,
Oh.
family friendly, not just for pause.
October,
Events.
Little Halloween theme.
Okay. Okay. All right.
Right, what was that date again, Corey?
I think it'll be October 19th.
Okay,
That's
cool.
that's final yet.
Saturday.
Mhm.
Well, hey, Brian, are you, doing the graphic novel? Is that you or Tracy?
That's Tracy.
Okay.
I guess I got the mascot as my graphic contribution.
So we'll wait for Tracy before we discuss the graphic novel, and if Tracy doesn't arrive before we close the meeting, then we won't discuss the graphic novel right now. But we're looking for an update on that at some point. And I would also ask Tracy to speak to K4C happening with that organization. One of our hopes, just to make sure everybody's on the same page, is that K4C is going to look at establishing some level of funding that will help cities, especially small cities, with climate action plan implementation, which is a bit of a bugaboo for small cities. City of Seattle has funding, City of Bellevue will have funding, smaller cities will need to share resources in order to be able to sort that out. We're hoping K4C can provide some leadership and potentially funds that would allow us to move forward with that.
That's awesome.
So,
And when will we hear more about that?
I'm sorry?
When will we hear more about that? Like if there are funds available, how we access the funds, what we can do to get on that list?
Tracy's our liaison for that. And so we're hoping, Tracy was asked to attend one of the National Night Out events in the area. And that was supposed to end before this meeting ended. And he was going to hustle from there over to here and join us when he can. So hopefully he'll join us before the meeting ends. Otherwise, we'll hear from him next month, and that will be at the top of our agenda. Ask him what's happening with K4C and regional funding for activities. With that in mind, that kind of segues into the next topic, which is I-2117. Because a lot of what K4C can and cannot do will probably depend on funding, and funding for everything related to addressing climate impacts and implementing climate action plans is going to be significantly affected if I-2117 actually passes. So this is the initiative that would give it not only stop collection of current carbon tax funds, but prohibit any future carbon tax credit trading of any sort. And it would effectively, it would take the single mechanism that was identified by groups who wanted to induce a market mechanism, create a market mechanism to create financial incentives to reduce carbon output. The concept was to develop a system that would parallel the system that was developed to reduce sulfur dioxide outputs back a couple of decades ago, back when acid lakes were major issue because fish were dying all over the country and a lot of impact to the lakes of acidification was thousands of miles away from where the sulfur dioxide that was acidifying the lake was being generated. So you'd have coal burning plants in Nevada, Nevada were causing sulfur dioxide emissions that would acidify lakes in New Hampshire, Vermont, and upstate New York. So the cap and trade approach was successfully implemented with caps being successively reduced. And when any other mechanism for addressing carbon emissions was proposed, large groups of people would say, well, let's just same way that we did with sulfur, we'll use cap and trade. So the current carbon tax credit approach is very much implementing cap and trade from years ago, saying, fine, if you want to do it that way, let's do it that way. And this initiative would make this impossible, eliminate this mechanism entirely. Our city council will be holding hearings on whether or not to take a position on I-2117 Thursday night. Our hope is that everyone can either submit written comments or attend in person and sign up in advance to provide comments. Our city council meetings currently are no longer having any online comment. So you're either submitting comments in writing in advance, or you're signing up at the meeting itself and attending in person so that you can provide your comments in person. And whatever you're comfortable with, we would urge you to do that, and urge you to urge your friends and neighbors and family to do the same. Hey, it's crazy.
So, and just to let you know, I'm planning on making a public comment on Thursday.
Thank you very much. I know Sarah submitted written comments. I plan to submit written comments. And I hope, obviously, do what you're comfortable doing. There's no mandate that as a member of this committee, you're required to make a comment at all, but we certainly would encourage you to raise your voice and hopefully in support of a no on 2117 position. But follow your conscience. As always, follow your conscience.
Yeah, I already submitted written comments just in case I'm not able to make it. I can send them if anybody wants to use it as a template.
Sure. Yeah, love that. Thanks, Matt.
Yep, please.
So I want to welcome Council Member Tracy Bertani attending for the record. I know that you've come from another event and really appreciate your breaking free so you can join us tonight.
Absolutely. Was the chief and the mayor are quite gracious about letting me go.
So we've been discussing plans for a couple of events that will be coming up. I'll fill you in after the meeting, and we're just moving on to a discussion of K4C funding, and that segues into I-2117. Really, our point right now is to support testimony at Thursday night's meeting. Just a reminder for everyone to attend or submit written comments for Thursday night's meeting, and encourage the council to take them. With that, I would like to circle back to, if you're available to speak to it, K4C, what's happening? Is there any chance that we would have funding available through K4C to support implementation of the climate action plan in Lake Forest Park? Or are there other things happening with K4C that we should be aware of as we're trying to work on implementation of our climate action plan?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking it. And for those of you who don't know, K4C is the King County Cities Climate Collaboration, which is why it's 4C. It's a organization set up of local governments, specifically cities and the county, to further the King County's goal for climate, specifically greenhouse gas reduction. And in and of themselves, they don't give grants. So they're not a funding source per se. That said, what they are really good at is taking the different resources that are around the county and making sort of a clearinghouse where you can find out where you can get grant funding and that kind of thing. The thing that I've been specifically working on them with, and a lot of you know about this already, is that we have at this city not the capacity to do a lot of the work that needs to be done for mitigation or resilience on climate. And partly it's because we're small. We don't have the resources, right? We don't have a tax base. We have a police department. We have a municipal court. These things take money. So in terms of adding staff members to help with, for instance, even the climate action plan management, we're going to need to find someplace else to kind of get the resources. So what I've been pushing them on is there's a lot of small cities. There's Algona, Pacific, us, Gacoma, all these small cities that are in King County that are small and can't really afford these things. So I really want the county to step up and have, for instance, a GIS specialist who could be loaned out to different cities, and maybe even geographically, in the sense that if we need one, or Kenmore needs one, or Woodinville needs one, we share one. And the idea would be that the county would pay for the position and yet be able to loan them out to the cities, and we get to supplement our own staff here, get the work that we need done. And so it's got some traction. They're seeing if that's actually A, illegal, and B, possible, but fundable. And so I really have some hopes that that will happen. But yeah, that's really going to be our issue: is how do we build the staff capacity that we sorely lack and that we can't pay. And the trick is going to be leveraging these resources of places that do have these. So Corey and I, just to switch gears, just attended a meeting with the RIA 8 staff. That's the Water Resources Inventory Area 8, which is Lake Sammamish, Lake Washington watershed area. It's actually a state agency. It really is to help with salmon recovery. In fact, the Salmon Recovery Council, I always get the confusion of, Corey, you can help me out here. They are also the Salmon Recovery Council, or those are two distinct bodies. Well, it doesn't matter. That's what their job is, essentially. So they have a lot of funding. They have a lot of funding sources, especially through the Climate Commitment Act. And so consequently, a lot of their goals are coincident with our climate action plan goals, in the sense of, for instance, protecting our stream habitats so that they are shaded and that kind of thing. The idea there is then that we could actually leverage some of that funding to also coincidentally hit our climate action plan goals, as well as further the environmental goals the city has in general. So we're working on figuring out whether that's possible, because again, we need staff like Corey or whoever to basically administer the grants, to be the city staff side of these grants. And that's where we run into our capacity problem again. So it's tricky only because we're small, but we can figure out ways to actually get the work done.
So to step back, because you're more attuned to where our city budgets are in general, where is our city budget with respect to being able to find funding for even, say, a 0.5 FTE to implement a climate action plan?
Yeah, right now is the time we're negotiating those things. That's a great question, because we're facing a lot of different staffing needs, and it's no secret we need more police officers. It's no secret we need more workers in public works, that kind of thing. And the question is, can we wedge in even a half FTE in climate action plan management? And the answer remains to be seen. I asked Sarah pretty much point blank. This committee gets 35,000 per biennium, or at least in the last budget got 35,000 budgeted. That was we used for the Cascadia consultancy work and things like that. The question I asked her was, would you mind basically foregoing that if it meant that we could actually get at least a part-time climate action plan manager? And she said, yeah, I don't know how y'all feel about that. Basically, I wanted to kind of sound you out of that.
Wow. Definitely a step in the right direction. Thank you, Tracy.
So these
Yeah, I
kinds
would
of
support that.
Thanks. Yeah, these kinds of negotiations are going on right now. So with the committee's concurrence, it gives us a little bit more leverage for the kind of thing you're talking
Yeah, I guess my question, very specifically would be, would this be a person, so I would not want to have that budget set aside specifically to do climate action work, to then be sequestered, removed from climate action work and provided simply to pay the salary of somebody who is already on city staff doing a myriad of other things, who would then not have time to separate the money, the time necessary to implement the climate action plan. You see what I mean? Because I'm Corey is full-time right now, plus. And, you know, working evenings to attend meetings like this. And certainly, I don't think I've ever once come by and seen you peeling grapes, wondering what to do with the hours of your day. So, if we're not adding staff specifically to work on these projects, but the budget is taken away and used to finance staff who are already committed to other projects, I don't see that advancing the climate action. So that is my single big concern. I think it's a great idea as long as there's also commitment from the city to allow that staff person to actually do work and document that they're doing work to move the climate action plan forward, and not simply doing all the other duties that they have to do anyway, and the funding is now coming out of the climate action plan, and that funding is not available to implement the climate action.
So if I hear you correctly, what you're saying is you'd rather have somebody who's part-time, literally just doing the climate stuff to the extent that the budget allows, rather than having somebody's title be this position and climate action manager.
Yeah, if
I-
the other position is already full-time plus, I don't see adding climate action manager being practical, frankly. I have been in the position where I already had a full-time job and somebody said, well, great, now we're going to pay you out of a different pot, require that you do 25% additional work, but you don't get overtime and you don't, you can't humanly do the work. That's unfair to the staff member, and it's unfair to everybody who has expectations that that staff member is supporting what they said that they were going to do. So how it gets there, I would prefer to have a situation where, for example, we shared staff among some of the other cities. For example, in Kenmore, for Shoreline, we're also funding a position, and we had a person who could tie in and carry forward climate action plans, and that's their job. And they're not being asked to also coordinate the 1,000 and other things, because quite honestly, I have a huge amount of respect for Corey, who does a huge amount of work. I don't see how, with all the juggling she's doing right now, tossing 3 more balls in the air and saying, yeah, is helping the situation.
I agree. So let me propose something to y'all. The city is also considering a GIS specialist. This is Geographic Information Systems. In other words, somebody who does maps and stories. It's really basically the industry standard now of how to get information out, not just to the public, but to within intra-staff kind of stuff as well.
Yep.
So what would you think about a combination GIS specialist / climate action manager position? It's not adding to anybody.
No, it would be, actually, this is the first I've heard of it, so cautiously, I would say that's an excellent idea, because when we went looking for data, we could not find data. And some of the data that we could not find was even, for example, right now, we should have a good map of canopy coverage coming out of our tree plan group. That should be brought into the city database in a way that it's usable. We should have really good mapping from our stream keepers who are already deeply involved in tracking what's going on with McAleer and Lions Creek. We should be able to integrate the information that the stream keepers are gathering with a GIS system so that we can track that and track improvements and degradation over the long term. There are also a lot of issues regarding potential hazards in the city that are not yet tracked. And we're aware of that. It's not directly related to climate impacts. But tying back to climate, if we could start tracking things like where are our solar panels, where are our USTs, home heating oil USTs, where are we having the carbon emissions, so that we can focus on reducing those, and also where are the greatest impacts that we need to mitigate. We already have an idea where we're missing canopy cover, but we can also look at issues of where we have less resilient housing stock, for example. Mimi.
If you, I assume that, or I don't know what I think, I'm tired, that it would be a GIS person, but when you hired them, they would also be hired to do this. So the job description would include being the person to implement the climate action plan. Is that the case?
That would be fair, yes.
Yeah, I think to Anne's earlier point, like we have this at the cancer center. We just hired somebody who was supposed to be 0.5 in our clinic and 0.5 in another clinic. And the other clinic was asking them to do so much work that they didn't have time to do our work. And I think that's like, you know, it's always going to be a risk if you have a position where it's 0.5 of one and 0.5 of another, that the person is going to just be asked to do so much work from one side that they don't have enough time to do the work on the other side. And I think that, you know, maybe GIS ends up being, you know, approximately 0.5 worth of work, and that's great. But I think it's important not to jump into a situation where it's like, oh, the other position, they're saying it's a 0.5, but there are certain people, you know, within the organization who really think it should be a 1.0, and they're giving them the person more work to do. So like putting in guardrails for that.
And so would the other 0.5 of that position be funded by the city, so that the person would have, so it would be a full-time GIS position, and then half of their time would be focused on implementing the climate action plan, including any GIS support necessary for that. And the other half of the time would be GIS support for other things in the city, like, you know, I'm sure engineering could use some GIS work done.
But no,
Or is this, again, transferring the climate action implementation money to engineering?
this is just spitballing at this point. I know that one of the council priorities this year was to actually hire somebody to do GIS. Our priority here is to hire a climate action manager. None of this is basically codified in the budget yet. There's some hard decisions that aren't going to have to be made. But the question is, you know, conceptually, is this a reasonable thing for y'all?
Conceptually, I could see it working if it's managed properly, but the devil's always in the details. Linda?
Yes, if I could jump in here, and I realize I might sound a little bit bitter, but after trying to pull these things off for many years when I was working at Harborview, even if we were splitting a position in the same department, it was impossible to keep it straight up, say 5% here and 5% there. It's so difficult to do that. I think we need to think really carefully about how that would work out, because in 30 years of doing that over there, I've never seen it be real successful. So that's just my cautionary tale here.
So you're saying maybe it'd be better if we're looking at a 50% GIS person and a 50% climate implementation person, that they're actually two different people.
Well, then that brings up a whole other thing about, you know, benefits and all these other things. Takes you down that other slippery slope. It's really, really difficult to figure that out, you know, how that could work. I mean, I think it can be done just because we failed. That was neurosurgery and, you know, that's a whole other world. But I think it pays to think about how careful you have to be with the expectations and who's going to be overseeing this and who's going to be making sure that this person is not, like Matt was saying, overwhelmed on one side because somebody thinks they're, you know, what they need them to do is more important. You got to be really careful in how you set this up so that that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I think in my experience too, I think having a part-time person devoted exclusively to climate would be preferable than to have a full-time person sharing their job between GIS and climate.
Yeah, I think so.
Thank you. That's really helpful, actually, because it's helping me figure out what my negotiation position is. So,
I guess my only input on that would be, first of all, getting a part-time person that's really specialist in environmental science is going to be hard. I mean, that's you're not going to get, you know, some PhD guy coming out and going, oh yeah, I'll do part-time work for a city for, you know, very low amount of money. So that is the one benefit of rolling it into a more specialized position, is that you're going to get a more qualified candidate to run it.
I'm gonna say, just because you can do GIS doesn't mean you can do implementation of the climate action plan.
I know that's true. That is so true.
Almost thinking it's sort of a grant writing overlap. You know, if I were trying to think of one other area that would overlap with implementing the climate action plan, it would probably be a person who's really good at figuring out where they can apply for funding that would allow us to implement the climate action plan.
Like a
And-
grant, like a grant writer, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Grant writing.
Because we had one of those many, many years ago before all the rest of you were born, and that worked out really well. But we haven't had, the city hasn't had one of those in probably 30 years.
So to swing back to that untouchable third rail, since we're in this discussion, one of the reasons that this is a challenge is because our when we have had initiatives to raise property taxes even a small amount in order to support the work that's needed to improve pedestrian safety, improve our parks, improve anything, it's been shot down really quickly by a well-organized opposition team. Having those conversations in the community and finding out what the sticking points are and whether or not there is a will to identify an increased property tax rate, because that's really what we've got here. We don't have a sales tax base or business tax base to raise funds. So for raising funds is through an increased property tax base, and we are a very residential community. So finding out what the sticking point is and identifying something that's clear and cannot be misrepresented. The last time an initiative was tried to raise funding for sidewalks and parks, it was misrepresented broadly, or facts could get out. So getting the facts out before the initiative was proposed seems like an appropriate step. But finding out
I'm sorry. That's exactly what happened the time before also. It was the way things were presented to people that just scared them so much that they didn't, all they had to hear was property tax raised and they were done. And I think there's a better way to handle that by giving them that information, but in a way that doesn't immediately turn them away.
So I want to put that in the parking lot as a long-term discussion that needs to be had. Because it's very hard to do something with nothing. And we are fortunate that the city council voted to authorize certain funding for this committee for this brief period. And we want to use those funds wisely, and I think we've been excellent stewards of the financial resources to date by using consultants to the minimum degree possible that we could in order to put out a professional climate action plan. Using the remainder balance of the funds wisely to encourage future investment is pretty important.
Yep.
Just a side note about difficulty finding someone to do it part-time. There's a LinkedIn post that went viral, about a mom just saying how much she was struggling to find a job that she could do during the hours when her kids were at school, and how this is it's just not out there, and to try that there should be a movement to create jobs for people within those hours that their kids are in school. So I don't know, just a different angle to that.
A good point. Good point.
So I don't think we have an answer for you, Tracy.
But at least know kind of basically how Jimmy feels, and so I'll try to amalgamate that. Yeah, I mean, I'm just at all desperate to get somebody to spell Corey, if nothing else, right? Because one of the things that as you pointed out is that she's putting in these evening hours to help us out. She's also doing part for it, right? And so she's there a lot. So it's just difficult to basically get the staff time to do this. So one of the things I'd also like you to consider, we are meeting in September, but when should the next meeting after that be? The question is basically,
Maybe stop at September 1st, and I did a survey of everyone, and everyone was in agreement that September 5th was fine. Every single person said September 5th was fine. Did you get the same?
Mayor confirmed he can attend.
Okay, so our September meeting will be Thursday, September 5th at 7 p.m.
Okay.
Okay, and now your question was,
what was now that we've changed our work plan so that we're more in the education, outreach, and legislative branches, as it were, do we need to meet as often? I guess that's really the question.
Do we need a what?
Meet as often. In other words, instead of monthly, bi-monthly, quarterly, what seems reasonable to you?
I'd like to have a discussion of it and not reach a decision at this meeting, because we can follow up on the September meeting with our thoughts as to how to continue meeting through the rest of 2024 and into 2025. But my personal experience is that when committees stop meeting, they stop.
Mm.
So if you have monthly meetings, you have a chance to get back together, remind each other of events, brainstorm ideas, plan for the future. And if you, it's fine to take a month or two off, but once you start meeting quarterly, you basically stop meeting.
Yeah, I feel like we could miss out on some good events, like especially during the summer, if we met less often.
I think at some point soon, I don't know when, the climate element thing will get started. And so some of us are involved in that, and we will be bringing that back to you guys for input and stuff like that. So I think that'll be something that's not strictly outreach and education that will be on the table.
Yeah, the planning commission is supposed to be connecting at some point with Sarah and me to discuss what they're doing with the comprehensive plan elements. So we're supposed to then bring that back to this group for participation also. I can imagine, slowing down in December and January. We're meeting on first Tuesdays. That would be right after New Year's, I believe. And it may be that the meeting after Thanksgiving, is also just challenging. But I would like us to consider if any one or two meetings could be deferred, but I really hesitate to move to quarterly meetings because I think effectively that will be the same as saying that we're stopping.
May I offer up a counter? The Lake Ballinger Forum, which is something that I participate in, meets on a quarterly basis, as does RIAGE. And so those are pretty healthy, active organizations. Now, albeit the RIAGE folks have a permanent staff, so that keeps them going.
Yeah.
But the Lake Ballinger Forum is really just sort of an amalgamation of various either stormwater or environmental specialists at different cities kind of getting together on a quarterly basis. It used to have an interlocal agreement that we would meet on a quarterly basis, but we don't even have that anymore, and yet it keeps going. So I think it kind of depends what kind of rhythm we want to get into. It is possible to keep an organization healthy with only quarterly meetings if we're hyper organized and say, okay, here are the benchmarks we're going to get to the next one, realizing our time is valuable. So, I don't want to just blanket throughout the board.
Appreciate that. So, with that, does anyone want to comment further on the discussion of meetings, whether we should continue to meet monthly, meet every other month, meet quarterly? Any other comments at this time? Otherwise, we'll move to another topic and revisit this in September.
Yeah, I agree.
I think I would be in favor of continuing monthly with the option to, take months off. Okay, let's just take next month off because, like it's Christmas or something, but the default would be monthly.
I agree with you.
Can I ask Tracy, are you asking this question in light of, are we burdening Corey too much? I'm just trying to figure out, is there some limitation that we should all be known or have some privy to?
I'm going to kind of have to throw you up the bus. Sorry about this, but yeah, it is really a concern about staff capacity.
Yeah.
There's just basically so much to not just Corey, but everybody's time, Mark's time. And we have a senior planner coming online, ideally this month. It hasn't been completely finalized yet. I'm not telling tales out of school here, but it's pretty much done. And the question is, what is this person willing to take on, right? So it really is the case. I'm trying to make contingencies that we can offer up. I really want to keep this continuity going because of all the committees I've sat in on, you and the planning commission are the ones with the most passionate and active members that get out there in the community and talk about stuff. I'm not trying to denigrate the other committees.
But our board is definitely there.
Our board is out there, but they still got basically some spaces, right? They've got some vacancies.
They have one student.
Oh, they have a student.
There's two students.
That's fair. Okay, but the point being that basically, again, what I was telling Mark Hoffman, our community development director, was when you got a bunch of residents who are volunteering their time and they're enthusiastic about the project, don't throw it away, right? Please don't throw it away. So the city is trying to figure out what its relationship to the CAC is going to be going forward. Now that our main mandate is done, that the climate action plan has been accepted by the council. I don't want the repeat of 2008 when we had another good climate action plan that was accepted by the council and was put on a shelf.
Yep. And until we see how it's implemented in the comprehensive plan, because really a lot of this now moves into things like our city ordinances. And again, developing enough of a public understanding of what is needed so that we can develop the funding to do the work that's needed. Because if people cannot, for example, travel through Lake Forest Park on foot without risking their lives, then they're gonna stay in their cars. You know, if you can't, I can't get from my house here on a bicycle or on foot without tremendous challenge. And that's in the summertime, when the days are long. At night, 5 o'clock on a winter's day,
Yeah.
justifying.
Right.
So until we can, I've lived here 30 years. There's been no progress made. If anything, it's gone backwards. So I am concerned the plan will be put on the shelf, nothing will happen, and neighborhoods will get more, and neighborhoods what don't have will get. And there will be more division within our community because people, I have explained, one of the reasons that the last tax proposition failed in my neighborhood was an absolute certainty on the part of my neighbors that they would never see anything in our neighborhood. Their taxes would go up and all the money would be spent in town center. And that's not unsurprising because that's what's happened for 30 years. So, making progress in building a community will take that effort as a community. And I think this committee's well positioned to help with that translation step and that community building effort.
I think we might be going about this the wrong way, Tracy. You should threaten to say, we are going to meet monthly until you guys hire a climate action person. In fact, we're going to go to bi-weekly if you hire. I think our strategy is wrong.
I second the motion.
Love it.
So there's certainly, I think there is consideration that there will be some months where everyone will agree that we can skip a month, but I think what I'm hearing from our committee right now is assume monthly with the occasional month, potentially 2 in a row where we would say, no, we'll take this break, but we're not, there's no intention of moving to quarterly. And there's a strong intention of keeping involved in the comprehensive plan and also in collaborating with developing ordinances that will help implement the climate action plan and hopefully raising the funds needed so that we could implement the climate action plan.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea that we've got members that are part of the, sorry, I'm missing my words right now. What's the other plan?
Comprehensive plan.
Comprehensive plan, thank you.
Yeah.
The comprehensive plan, and we got members involved in that, and they can, if we need to meet every other month, at least we've got ways of keeping in contact with what's going on and keep us involved. And so I think that could be a healthy way of also sustaining us.
Thanks.
So we had, where are we at with time? It's now 8 minutes after 8. I think we have time to ask about the graphic novel steps, which is also one of yours.
Yes. All right. The 2 high schoolers that I reached out to, well, they're not high schoolers, but they're college students that I reached out to. One is at Occidental College, and that is basically enjoying college life, shall we say, and has no time for our graphic novel. The other high schooler who became also a college student is changing careers. So it's in fact dropping out of college and going into the military.
Oh.
So
Not going to have time to do a graphic novel.
definitely not doing a graphic novel. Actually isn't basic right now. So, sorry about that. I should have told you sooner.
So that sounds to me like we are not making any progress on the graphic novel. Do we have any hope of progress on the graphic
Well, I guess the question really becomes, um, remind me of the mission. We're trying to make a graphic novel of the climate action plan that we now have in Vienna. And are we going to give them a script, or is the here's the climate action plan?
This is kind of your project, Tracy, so.
Okay. Are you giving the authorization to narrow the scope if need be?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure that I wasn't going against something that we had already decided.
No, there is no defined scope for the graphic novel,
Well, let me.
except that it is
Okay.
made by volunteers who will then
Twinkle.
get credit and kudos.
Okay.
And that part of the funds that we have residual would be available to help support its production and potentially provide some level of stipend. But I think we're pretty much looking at the adults providing free labor and not the artists.
Nice. Okay.
So-
Okay.
So
By the
if
way-
you alternatives,
Sorry. I continue. I didn't mean to interrupt.
no, the graphic novel was kind of an extra on the side that we were hoping for as we further engage youth in the community. Especially if it were sort of a black and white, and then it can be a coloring book or, you know, a way of engaging youngsters more effectively with what the issues are. If it does not come, if we do not have a path forward on it, that's fine. We should just cut that. It was added and it can be removed. So if we don't have people interested in doing it, then we can just move on from it. Mimi, and then.
Alright. Just a quick, I remember talking about the novel is a long version to me, but something that we could hand out at events. I don't know if a graphic novel has to be pages and pages long, but a graphical representation of aspects of the climate action plan. Is that not what we're talking about anymore?
No, I recall that part of the discussion as well, and you're right. I think that the thing that we had pictured was maybe 8 pages, something that's easy to hand out at the events that we're at, and it doesn't take a long time to read.
So can we drop that back over to you for you to
Yes.
consider
Oh, absolutely.
in, you know, whether anyone in the arts community is interested? It really could be a single page handout, it could be front and back handout. You know, it could be very, there are many options.
There are many options. Yeah, thanks for giving me the last.
Could we like advertise it with Shore Lake Arts? Like, is that
That's definitely a thing. We're going through some flux right now, but we're going to be settling down in about a month or so. So I think that that's a possibility.
Yeah, I was so sad that the Battle of the Bands is on hold. We look forward to that every year.
What happened?
Just staffing issues. I mean, it's endemic in every nonprofit, right? All these things cost more money, and they take up lots of people's time, and if you don't have the bodies, you can't do it. Yeah.
That's it.
That is a good reminder for me to donate to Shore Lake Arts right now.
Same here.
Are there any other agenda topics that anyone would like to bring forward at this time? We're on hold with a couple of issues like learning where our comprehensive plan is, pulling together a list of ordinances, especially in light of court cases that have come through this year that constrain what can and cannot be done, some of the regulations. And to be honest, I think we're going to have to see what the outcome of the vote is on I-2117 this fall. I think that's deeply concerning.
Yeah, I'm really hoping that there's a good outcome from the city council, because I think the events that we're planning on going to, you know, family day, picnic in the park, like I think we need to be engaging people about that specifically. Because I think that there's a lot of people who their understanding of it doesn't go beyond like, oh, gas will be cheaper. You know, it's
Grocery
like the
prices
property
won't.
taxes thing, like you were talking about. It's like people just they can't understand anything past like, oh, this is taxes, it's expensive.
Well, and that's even in a community that went through the Iraq War period where gas was up to $5 a gallon, just so Exxon could make the biggest profits ever.
Yeah,
And there was nothing else behind it other than the biggest profits for oil companies ever, and people pay the price. But the money isn't going to fixing the problems.
can we talk about it at our public events, like at our booths and at the market?
I think right now we can talk about it, but we can't come out for or against it. It would just have to be purely informational.
I'm trying very hard right now not to say anything for or against it in our public meeting here. I'm trying to encourage everyone to participate in the process. But I would love to be at a point if the city council were to take a position that we could then share that position and the rationale behind that position.
So just to get this straight, are you telling me that the Climate Action Committee can't take a stand on whether or not we should tax carbon emissions? Are you serious?
The council adopts a position. That's really the state rules.
Oh,
For this initiative, for discussing the initiative itself.
Yeah, as
have-
representatives of the city, we are not allowed to. As individuals, we all have our own opinions.
Yep. There are other organizations that I'm a member of who have taken positions. So, but especially with respect to I-2117, I am hopeful that we will have a productive city council meeting Thursday night. And after that meeting, we will be able to be explicit about our position.
okay.
Cool.
So one other one, can I put on the radar? Sure. I-2066. It concerns heating sources. Take a look at it.
Yes, this is the one that would make it impossible for cities to constrain natural gas use.
That's good.
And
It's on the November ballot.
that'll be on the November ballot. Much to talk about.
Mhm. So I just real quickly to kind of loop back before we go for Streamfest. I just heard from Eric Admin, and he's all for us to have a joint booth with Kenmore and Bothell. So Tracy, do you have somebody from Kenmore and Bothell that I could get a hold of as far as their climate action committees or people that would be interested in that, so that I can ask them if they would want to get a joint booth for us to present at Streamfest?
The Kenmore, Nina Rasmussen is definitely your contact. She's their climate action manager. I think that's her title, is climate action manager, in fact. And then at Bothell, I'll have to investigate. I haven't had as much contact with them, but I'll ask the mayor and find out.
Okay. And maybe I'll, yeah, okay. Nita, you said Nita Rasmussen?
NINA.
Nina, okay.
Rasmussen?
Yes. Spells.
Okay, so we have 3 events on our calendar now. We've got our Family Day. We've got Picnic in the Park, and we've got Streamfest. So that'll keep us busy in September. That's basically every weekend in September. We'll have an event, and that's a great time for us to be out there and talking about all kinds of interesting things with our community. And hopefully we can share the staffing so that we all get to see each of these events and no one person starts feeling exhausted. Anything else for tonight?
Mm-mm.
I think homework is to take a look at our this new initiative that just didn't get enough signatures to get on the ballot. Because I think we'll probably want to see if we can get that in front of the city council also. That's the I-2066. Have to get it on next month's agenda. And in the meantime, everyone who can get comments in Thursday night, most welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you.
If there's nothing else, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
I need someone to make the motion and then I'll recognize Brian's second.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Matt. Brian, are you still on board as a second?
I'm on thirds now, so yeah, let's go for it.
Mhm.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there anyone opposed to adjourning? Any opposition? Any opposition? Hearing no opposition, we are adjourned. Thank you ever so much for joining us at the September meeting.
Thank you very
for
much.
Lake Forest Park Climate Action.
Thanks, Anne. Thanks, Corey.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. Thanks, everyone.